Hello and welcome to Forbes ESG podcast or videocast, depending on whether you're listening to this or watching this. Let me first introduce the guests. We have Jan Růžička, the Chief Reputation Officer at Home Credit Group.
Hello, guys.
We have Jakub Malých, who is a Vice President Climate and ESG at MSCI.
Thanks and hello, everyone.
And I'm Viktor Hanzlík. I'm a partner at McKinsey and I lead sustainability in Central Europe. Great to have you with us. And over the next 5 episodes, including this one, we're going to have a conversation from 3 different perspectives on ESG. And everybody who has been following business, has been following the news, probably recorded a surge in interest in ESG. And that's the first thing that we're going to cover. We will be talking about why are we talking so much about ESG now? ESG has been around, but right now it's a massive topic even in mainstream media. So we will cover why that is. We will then deep dive into each of those 3 letters. In ESG, we'll talk about E for environment, we'll talk about S for social, and G for governance. And then finally, we will provide 2 different regional perspectives. We'll talk about Central Europe, where each of us is from originally, and we will also talk about Asia, also to make use of the great, it's not a coincidence, but the great fact that both Jakub and Jan are based in Asia currently, so are able to also provide this very international perspective. Looking forward to the discussions, and now over to Jakub.
Thanks, Victor. So as you mentioned, like in this first episode, we'll just talk about ESG more broadly, talk about the trend as it is, and then, do more of a deep dive in the later episodes. So starting from the top, what is ESG? Maybe for those of the listeners who actually haven't heard it before, the 3 letters ESG, they stand for environmental, social, and governance factors. Which when I think about it, kind of is about everyone. Everything that is around us, right? The environment and society is something that is all around us, and we interact with both of them every day. So when we say ESG, by definition, it would mean something else, for different people or different actors in the economy, right? So me as an individual or any of us. What we probably mostly care about, in our everyday life is that, we breathe clean air, we can swim in clean waters, and basically the environment that we use, is nice, it's clean, it's not polluted, right? So that's the point of view of an individual. If I'm a business, I more care about probably, how do these things and maybe even regulation related to it, how does it impact my business, right? What kind of changes do I need to do to kind of survive in this, changing economic environment that takes ESG factors more into account. Then when I'm an investor, and that is what I'll be focusing most, in this podcast series, I care about, how do ESG factors or sustainability topics, how do they impact my investments, right? So this is what it is. And just to finish my intro part, also the reason why we decided to do this series is because all 3 of us feel that sometimes when you see this discussion, it is fairly vague. There is things like, let's stop climate change, which of course we need to do it, or we should work towards it. But I think that for many people, they cannot really grasp that. Like how can I stop climate change? No, but these ESG factors, climate change, sustainability, it does impact us in everyday life. So that's what we want to focus on too.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that we will be covering the same topic from 3 very different perspectives. You already mentioned, Jakub, that you as a vice president at MSCI, you are helping the investors, and basically you are living on the markets. Then we have Victor, who as a partner at McKinsey, he is helping companies, big and small, to basically navigate through this changing environment, to help them to thrive. And then me, in my case, I know mass market, so I listen to even ordinary customers, final customers on many different markets, not only here in Europe, but in Asia or United States. So I will be trying to understand it a little bit from their perspective. And then we hope that we will give you the whole picture, what is ESG about from these different perspectives that Jakub talked about. One more disclaimer, which I would like to sort of like write down here. Even though if you are hearing ESG for the first time, this abbreviation, or basically you think, hey, this is something vague or not important for me, believe us, we will try to do our best to do it in a fun form. And also, we do believe that it's not a new thing. ESG is not with us, I don't know, last 3 years. we think that every good, fair, local, small business in your local town or your local village, they are already ESG because they are treating their customers, employees fair. They are thinking about the environment, the community around them, even maybe, I don't know, local lake, how to make it better, So basically, at the end, ESG is about giving you guys, the stakeholders, either investors or partners or media or regulators, more information about the businesses. So at the end, we can call it non-financial reporting.
Also, ESG was always around. It was, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, but now it's big.
Absolutely. I mean, we definitely do see the surge in interest, not only in the business world or the investment world, but also, as you mentioned, it's in media. So even people not directly kind of working with the topic of ESG would probably see it recently. So I will speak, for from the investor point of view. So kind of the discussions that we have with our clients. And then, I'll leave it to you guys to tell us, how the business, or why do you see, from the business or, like you, Honzo, interacting with the mass market, why do you think, the interest is there? So from the investor point of view, we see four main reasons why really investors started caring much more about ESG and sustainability topics in recent years. So first of all, they are gaining better understanding that ESG does influence investment returns and risk, right? Like there was, I would say, the perception before that, that's something that is maybe even detrimental to your investments, but that cannot be further from the truth. The second is, and that's related to kind of the democratization of communication, which I believe Honza will talk about more, is that investors have become much more wary about reputational risk, right? So a company does something bad, instantly it's on social media, and it can be a huge problem for the company and the investors in it. Thirdly, of course, by now, and I'm proud to say almost that the company where I work at, it's contributing to this, is that we have much better data and we are able to much better quantify and define what is ESG, how to measure it, who is doing better in some of these topics and worst. And finally, and that is kind of, combining all of these three things that I said now and what we said before, that ESG and sustainability is, the topic of the day. It is the zeitgeist. So basically, as more market participants are adopting it, basically you have to jump on the train. Otherwise, you will be left behind.
I know that McKinsey always use the three examples, but similar to Jakub, I will have also four. He already mentioned democratization of communication, social media. They are everywhere. Every customer who will do a viral video about your business, he can help you big time, or they can kill you immediately if the video about your product or service or behavior will be nasty. You will have a big problem immediately. And the similar for investors, partners, you name it. So they can go online immediately, talk about your business, about your numbers. So it's very different to, 15 years ago when you got only broadsheets or tabloids and, there were some articles. Now it's much more faster, and your reputation is on the brink all the time. This is connected to the second change, and this is generational change. Everybody is talking about millennials and Gen Z, even younger now, but these two big cohorts that are now constituting, big chunk of both employees and the customers, they have very different habits, how they operate on the markets, how they buy the product, how they, pursue the service, how you make a recommendation to their friends. So these people, younger ones, with their values and habits and thinking about the world, empowered by social media, they can really move the business from, let's call it, shareholder capitalism to the stakeholder one. And then there is the final one, the climate change. We are talking about it all the time in the last 10 minutes. These young people, Gen Z, millennials, we see from the data that this is very, very important topic important, close to their heart, and they want us as a business community to do something about it. Not only environment, of course. They would like to see, companies really backing some values, some causes, to be part of them. So it's not only about, hey, make money or give me good product or service, but really be part of the change. And all this big bucket of changes are moving us as a businesses into one direction.
Let me talk about the climate change a little bit, because you said that we see in the data that this is important for young people. That's absolutely true. But we not only now see it in the data, we actually see the physical manifestations of climate change out in the world. And when we were chatting before the start of the podcast, each of us have their, I don't want to say favorite set of climate catastrophes, but like a set of things that caught our attention of what already is happening in the world because of climate change. Yeah? So if it's oil and gas infrastructure collapsing into the permafrost in Russia, if it's a power grid freezing over in Texas, if it's fires around California. So each of those things, they have also other causes, but climate change has in each of these cases very significantly contributed. So we also have the physical infrastructure already taking the strain. It's very visible here in the region. We have the talk about, there's a lot of talk about water. There's not enough water, there's a drought. People can see that, and they really care about what is happening in the fields around where they live. So there's this physical manifestations. Also, the 6th assessment report of the IPCC. We promised this would not be boring, but this is important. So this is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. So they just released a big report which is summarizing the latest science, both on what is happening in the physical world as well as what needs to be done. And for somebody who has kids or otherwise cares about the future of mankind and the planet, that is fairly depressing reading. We will talk about this much more when we get to the chapter E. But we need to be acting now, and this has now become very clear to very many people who have started putting pressure on companies also.
And that's why there is also politics and regulatory. Let's not forget them. They are pushing this agenda, ESG agenda, climate change agenda pretty thoroughly. Logically, they are listening to the electorates. They wouldn't like to be re-elected, or they need to find some real big problem in their community. You know, a lot of cities are basically like falling down to the sea. Jakarta, Ho Chi Minh, big chunk of Florida, big chunk of Netherlands. So it's a political topic. That's why there is a Paris Accord. There is there was the huge Glasgow conference, 5 months ago, and it's not only about the, let's say, Western countries or European, United States, Living in Asia, I see pretty clearly that the governments in Southeast Asia, China, they are very, very, open about green finance, ESG, climate change. This year, there is a G20 presidency of Indonesia. And just recently, I was part of some roundtable led by Indonesian Ministry of Finance, and they were like introducing their priorities for the presidency. And it's not about manufacturing. It's not about, shipping or, stuff like that. It's green. It's very, very green. Because, we see impact of climate change in our country, Indonesia, every day. And we need to do something about it. And we would like to use our influence as Southeast Asian countries to move the world in this direction. So it's really not only, Greta Thunberg or Frans Timmermans in European Commission or Joe Biden and his climate advisors. It's really happening everywhere.
We just had a French presidential election this past weekend. And one of the first 4 tweets, which Emmanuel Macron tweeted, was, clearly, you thank your supporters, you promise you will be a president for everybody, even for those who haven't voted for you. And then one of those 4 first tweets was, our program is to make France a grande nation écologique. And if let that sink in, that could have been a great united nation, it could have been a great scientific nation, it could have been many things, but what he chose, he chose ecological.
Yeah, maybe let's get deeper and let's talk numbers. We all agree that it's relevant, it's important, it's interesting, it's impacting world, society, businesses, you name it. So maybe let's start with you, Jakub. Why you think that this is important for the companies and how you see it and how you measure it? whether it's even measurable to measure ESG. This is a strange abbreviation. How you see it from the perspective of MSCI?
Yeah, thanks, Jan. I actually wanted to say, thanks so much for all of this. I think we really build up the hype, about ESG, why it is relevant, that is basically happening everywhere, not just in Europe, but globally. But I would also agree. Let's get to some, real either numbers or evidence, because we said at the beginning we don't just want to talk, these broad concepts, but we want to bring it closer to people, whether they are individuals or let's say consumers, right? That is all of us through, buying goods and services, whether they are businesses, which is again, almost all of us, either we are employed in one of them or we maybe own them, or we are investors.
Dig the numbers, so dig the numbers, man.
Let's go into that. So again, I will take that investor point of view, so why do investors think that the ESG or what evidence do we have or we provide as a company that ESG really is relevant to companies? So of course, because we our target audience is the investors of the world, so that is not so vague. It would be the big asset owners, say pension funds or big asset managers. So basically these companies, you maybe saw some funds and you wanted to invest in one of them. So those would be the target clients we talk to. So of course they care about whether the ESG is both relevant for their investments, but even going one level down, if it really impacts the company's financial performance, right? Because that should be in the end reflected in the investment performance. So this is really much of what we do. We are trying to produce research that is trying to kind of isolate the ESG factors and how are companies dealing with them. So how are they tackling ESG risks, right? So let's say how are they changing their operations to kind of adjust to the greener economy. But it's not only about the risks, like if I don't decarbonize my operations, like I'm not going to survive in this world. It's also about the opportunities, right? Like, of course, a great example of that would be electric mobility, renewable energy, and so on, right? Like these are these kind of up and coming industries. Victor would know more about that, and I'm sure he will tell us. So how can they capitalize on that, and of course how that is reflected in their results? So we actually published two huge flagship pieces. It's called Foundations of ESG Investing, where we exactly look at this. This paper is publicly available. It's also in many of the big investment journals, so you can have a look at it. And there we are not trying to only see, if ESG is kind of correlated with better financial or investment performance, because that can be driven by anything else, not the ESG, but we are actually trying to see if ESG can be one of the factors causing the better performance, right? So we identify kind of three, as we call them, transmission channels through which ESG, or like kind of taking it into account better, better incorporating in your operations, how it can lead to you performing better. So one would be through really the fundamental performance of the company. So our premise that we tested is, that if you kind of, if you are doing well on ESG, like generally speaking, you should be a good, stable, solid company with good structures, good governance, which we'll talk about later, and so on. And that, of course, should be reflected in how much money you can make, how stable your earnings are, and so on. The second one would be how the company is reacting to macro factors, right? Like we constantly see something, most recently, of course, the war in Ukraine, was a huge kind of blow to many businesses and so on. So basically, how much impacted you are, or your share price, or maybe price of your bonds are impacted by this. And finally, we also want to see if companies, who score better or worse on ESG, if they are at higher risk of kind of being struck by idiosyncratic events, right? That suddenly you find out, that the CEO of the company basically embezzled all the money and the company is worthless, So these are the three things that we kind of tested, and we really saw that broadly, the companies that we rate higher on the ESG, they would actually perform better on each of these three channels. So for us, that's a huge evidence that really this is relevant for both the businesses and the investors.
Maybe this is great, and I will need to read that report in detail, because it's a very interesting question. So what is the correlation? What is the causation? And part of ESG is basically two types of people and two types of companies care a lot about ESG. So are the ones which are directly hit by the adverse effects of companies not doing ESG, and the others are the companies and consumers who are already rich and their needs have moved on. So they care not about just putting bread on the table; they care about the wider world. But let me give you some numbers. More than 70% of global GDP currently already is covered by some sort of net zero commitment. That means 70% of global GDP, depends how you measure it, according to some measures, even quite a bit more, but at least 70% of GDP sits in countries where the governments have committed to get to net zero emissions by 2050 in the case of the rich countries, 2060 or 70 in the case of the developing ones. So if we believe that the governments are serious, this 70% of GDP will need to change fundamentally. It's not just a matter of 2050. This will need to happen very fast because the second number is 50% by 2030. So again, what science and IPCC tell us that we need to cut emissions by 50% by 2030 in order to stay on the 1.5 degree pathway. Also, if we don't stay on the 1.5 degree pathway, that's when there's a big likelihood of really adverse effects and the worst effects of climate change materializing, and that's an astonishing and again translates roughly in the world needs to cut emissions in half. Also compared to where we are now in 1 decade.
Wow!
So in 1 decade,
big stuff.
We need to, if we are to meet this target, this is absolutely unprecedented change in the pace. And maybe one last number is 130 trillion, and 130 trillion US dollars, which is like 1.5 times the global GDP or 6-7 times the current US GDP. So that is already the amount committed by private financial institutions for investment into the net zero transition. That's the number from the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero.
And it's big chunk of money, we are talking about. Maybe, I think that, it's not only about like big numbers, coming from above, I don't know, global commitments and global needs, but really, again, if I go, downstream to the final customers, they are really changing habits massively as well. I have also, by the way, 3 numbers. So if I dig the first one, so 70% of consumers prefer to buy sustainable products now, and they are even able to pay more for it. So if your product, has good values, is sustainable, good cause, not only they prefer it, they will pay more for it, which is great. Second number, this is the same for employees. So currently 70% young Gen Z employees, and you need them because they are the ones who are coming now from the university so you are hiring them and your talent acquisition team is hiring them. So 70% of young employees, job seekers, want to work to environmentally friendly and sustainable organization. And the third number, investors or partners, banks, 85% of them, so the big majority, consider ESG factors in their investment decision. And not only like where I put my, equity money in to buy some stock or whatever, but also the normal funding opportunities. So if you are a big bank, you are really thinking most of the time, okay, this company I will put my money in, or my deposit holders' money in, is this company sustainable? Is it ESG compliant? So it's really like changing both upstream that you guys talk about, and I see it also from the other side.
I think the employees and the talent in the next generation, that's extremely important. I think all 3 of us see that. So if there's a job interview, it used to be that you were interviewing the people who won the job. Very often we find ourselves on the receiving end of an interview of are we doing enough for the society? Are we unleashing whatever resources and whatever capabilities we have in a way to help society? And we also need, like everybody who is interviewing also needs to be able to explain what our climate policies are. And what we're doing about it. Do you see something similar?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say all of us are, like I guess it's also actually us, who care about that. So we would ask our employers, the same question. But definitely, it's as you say. I think the generational change, the change in values, so to say, or the way of life, is absolutely one of the key factors driving this, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think so, absolutely. So not only the changes again upstream, downstream, but also processes between and among different stakeholders. So us as a company is how we do business between and among themselves. Also, towards customers and employees, regulators, of course, and all these changes are creating the opportunities. I see the thrive of green finance, new products, green bonds. We will talk about them. So all these instruments are now like moving up. The money are moving in, and you can use them very, profitably for your business. So again, ESG is not only some new abbreviation for CSR, doing good, giving back. This is new way how to do business, how to be good, and how to make money in the same time. And the flow of money, the Victor already mentioned it. Maybe, Jakube, I would like to ask you about, how you see the flow of investor money. We know that there are these ESG ETFs, a lot of ETFs provided, like stamped by your company, so these MSCI ESG ETFs, etc. So how you see the flow of money coming into it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is super important to kind of transition from talking that it is relevant and people care about it to actually providing some evidence.
Give us money. Show us the money.
Exactly. I think and especially why I say it is it's similar to, like judging a situation in a country. We are talking maybe where the life is better or worse. What is the best gauge of it is the foot voting, right? Where people are actually moving to live. So
Amen.
It's the same here. We can talk about, it's so important, everyone cares. But if you wouldn't see the money actually flowing into as you said, ESG ETFs or funds, the green finance kind of not growing in size, the evidence would be none, right? And it would be just talk again. So that is why it's good that we can switch to this part now. Hopefully, those who can also see the video, see some nice graphic by now where I prepare some charts to provide this evidence. But I'm gonna talk about three things, where we can really measure the increase in interest or actually, investors and companies flowing into the space. So first would be what we already mentioned, the different ESG exchange traded funds, that is kind of easy to measure. So really how much money is flowing to funds that do track one of MSCI's ESG indexes, right? So once again, hopefully you see some of that. We see the number of both the funds being created and money flowing into them increase, I would say almost exponentially. If we look at a couple of years back, 5 years ago, it was very minimal. And basically from there, I would say the growth is in, tens of percent every day. Every year. The second big area, I would say is the green finance, right? So especially this is kind of easy to measure by the volume of labeled bonds being issued. So those are, maybe some of the listeners heard that before, all the green bonds, sustainability bonds. So basically these are, debt securities that you issue in order to finance some green project or social project and so on. So basically by now, if we look globally, of course, there are different measures. Of course, some of these bonds would be of different quality, right? Some are greener than the others. But really, if we look at the broad kind of really the global number, we see about 200 billion of these labeled bonds being issued every quarter. So we are really approaching 1 trillion a year, just once again securities that are supposed to at least achieve some green or social objectives. So this is again a huge kind of evidence supporting what we are saying here. And finally, this is something that I would say, from our perspective, and that would be our interactions with the companies that we are rating, So one of MSCI's flagship ESG products is the ESG rating of companies. So we're basically trying to show, on the broad spectrum of all of these ESG topics, how are the different companies doing. So we will talk a little bit more, in the other parts of this podcast, but basically, again, just a couple of years ago, you would see that that the companies, if I can put it very bluntly, didn't care as much, right? They didn't think it was important to them. They didn't think it was important to investors or providers of capital, which can be fixed income investors, banks, whoever. They just didn't think it was necessary to kind of perform well on that or take it into account. So again, how we can measure that this is changing is basically the interactions that we have with the different companies that we rate on ESG, right? Once again, before it was, you could say, quite little, and now basically the number of companies, again, that they basically do want to talk to us, that they want to know, why are they rated in a certain way, maybe think about then what they are doing worse, what they should improve. That number of companies is also increasing dramatically. So I think these are kind of evidence from my point of view.
Do you see the same? So your clients are calling you, hey Victor, help us with ESG. This is important for us.
For sure. Yeah. So this is one of the topics which is top of mind for CEOs, for boards, and some of them are leaders. Some are just trying to get their heads around that.
Yeah.
But broadly speaking, there's this is very interdisciplinary, and companies typically are very good at knowing what they do. So if you're manufacturing something, you're good at manufacturing that. If you're a bank, hopefully you know also quite a bit about your customers' businesses, but there are still some limits as to what you know. So what we really are seeing is a really big interest in understanding not just how this works, how ESG and all those pressures and all those opportunities work within one industry, but across the borders.
Got it.
Manufacturing companies want to know how banking regulation is evolving. Few years ago, they did not care. Now they pick up that ECB is running climate stress tests. Does that mean that my financing is going to become more expensive? Or rather, what do I need to do so that my financing does not become more expensive? And conversely, if you're a bank and if you signed up to cut finance emissions by 50% by 2030, as many of the banks have done, you're looking at your balance sheet and you're asking, okay, where? So where do I cut so that I don't damage my clients, so that I capture the opportunities? But which of these industries can really decarbonize quickly? Which of those customers?
Yeah, I think this is super interesting, and I see it every day. That similar to GDPR, nobody like, hey, GDPR, this is some stuff coming for Brussels. This will never happen. People are sleeping on it, and then boom, change happened, and now it's like global game. Nobody's thinking about it. So I do believe that from regulatory perspective, ESG is something similar. So it's like bubbling in the pot like some stew. And now it's coming up and everybody is like, talking about it. So I think super interesting opening of our 5 series podcast. So I think it's time to wrap up. We try to give you our best as an opener, why we think that ESG is important, not only from environmental perspective, but for the employees and customers, regulators, investors, clients, partners. So ESG is here. It's not going anywhere. If you think that, for example, geopolitical changes or energy prices now that are super high will just kill it, guys, forget it. It's a global game. It's happening not only in Brussels and Europe, and not only in Washington and the White House, but everybody around the globe. The China, India, Southeast Asia, Japan, you name it, everybody is going in this direction. So it will be here. So let's stay tuned and let's think about how you guys can be part of the game and use it as an opportunity and a challenge. Am I right?
Totally right.
Absolutely. Happy to discuss it in the next section.
So next section will be about E as an environment. So let's stay tuned and see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks.